Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Just when you think you've kind of pinned to the tail on the donkey, you look a level deeper and you see more chaos. Multipolarity is a real bitch, and everyone's trying to penetrate everyone else's intelligence networks. Got all these random countries that used to mean nothing to anyone, and now they're like secretly important players in all these machinations that are going on. Ukraine has become kind of this, a well that Western interests can go into to muck around, and they want it to be weird, and they want it to be confusing, and they want it to be overly complicated. And so people are, really desperate for some kind of like sense making mechanism. And in the absence of anything that is somewhere in the middle between it's all total chaos, nothing really happens, nobody's in charge, it's a total jump ball, there's no predicting the future, we can't even understand the present, where it's either that or it's actually everything is perfectly ordered. There's like a pinnacle elite group that controls everything. When your choices are one of those two things, it's not great for mental stability, and people need something to hang on to.
Welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. As Ryan mentioned last week, we're going to be rotating hosts from here on out, but for now, I am your erstwhile host, Spencer Clavin, currently in the midst of a transition from features editor of the American Mind to editor at large of the American Mind, which is a title I love because it suggests that I'm a wanted criminal stalking abroad in the land, yet to be caught, still at large. And I'm joined this week by managing editor Seth Barron and editor James Poulos to discuss a whole number of things. But to begin, we're going to talk about Trump's money. We did touch on this subject a while back when we talked about his troubles in New York with Letitia James and the massive bond she slapped him with, $464 million. Which first was lowered in appeals court to $175 million, which was kind of a win for Trump. But then there was another shocking turn of events, which is the valuation of Trump's social media company. And his first day of trading on the NASDAQ, which was Tuesday, brought the company to an estimated value of $8 billion. And most of that is his, so that brings his worth to about $4.6 billion. If that were liquid, obviously it would erase these bond problems, but of course it's not. This is a valuation of the company that seems to have some political element in it, maybe a big one. I don't know. That's one of the things I'd like to talk with you guys about. The New York Times is trying to make it out like this is all kind of confected people that just like Trump and they want to support him, and interviewing folks who are in fact, investing for that reason. But also, there's presumably some of that money isn't imaginary, isn't fake. What do you guys make of this? Is this like the GameStop stock writ large, or is this actually something that, it would be hilarious if he just totally, the more they try to kill him, the stronger he gets.
Well, he does behave that way. There is this kind of anti-fragile aspect of Trump where when you try to break him, he gets stronger. Yeah, it does have kind of like a meme stock side to it, this with evaluation, but I don't know. I guess it has some underlying value. Somebody brought it to market. What I think is funny is the response. Well, and this goes to something that I've thought about for a while regarding money and the left. Now, they used to talk all the time, the whole time I was growing up and until very recently, they used to talk about money in politics all like the left did
Mm.
all the time and talk about how all the billionaires owned politics and all of this. But ever since, I guess, Hillary came on the scene in a big way,
Mm.
and, all the boomers, rich boomers started giving money to her, and the billionaire class turned against Trump and all the tech people. And I mean, you can look at these charts of who contributes to whom, and, the only people who contribute to Trump in a big way, like professionally speaking, are like, blue collar workers, cops, people like that. All of the professions tend to support the Dems. So anyway, all I'm saying is that they've kind of switched their view of money.
Yeah.
Um, and in the last like ever since Trump came on, there was this whole thing about how he's actually quite poor and that all of his wealth is just a figment. It's all imaginary. He's actually has no money.
Yeah.
It's and that this would be all revealed soon enough. And they've kept it up. Even I saw memes when he couldn't come up with $500 million, and they were like, who has $500 million on hand? Like Taylor Swift and
Yeah.
Oprah Winfrey, um, and now he has this new source of wealth. It's just driving them crazy. They kind of have like a schizophrenic attitude towards billionaires, whom they claim to hate, but then
Right.
that's like all of their support. I mean, they don't hate George Soros.
Well, there is a class thing going on here, I think. Remember when Fran Lebowitz said that Trump is a poor person's idea of a rich person? Maybe I
Mhm.
not person, but like that to me was really revealing because it on the one hand it's like pretty true and it's part of his appeal for
Yeah.
sure that the rest of us that don't have a bajillion dollars to spend do sort of sit around thinking like I would have a golden toilet that
Mhm.
so it was a fair observation, but the spirit in which it was made was also clearly a spirit in which poor was basically a synonym for like stupid
Yeah.
and evil and unsophisticated, which is just remarkable given what you're saying, Seth, that the whole kind of moral narrative about the left has always been that they're for the working class, the uprising of the proletariat, however you want to frame that. And it sort of remains that. There's still this vibe, or at least an attempted vibe, that this is where you go if you believe in the downtrodden. But
Yeah.
then there is also this very strange, it's really about who, of course, is allowed to have money. It's whom, but there's this really weird like gloating that goes on about, oh, Trump isn't worth what he says, or like he's poor in spirit, essentially.
Yeah,
You
I'm
know
also curious, like, what a rich person's idea of a rich person is supposed to
Mm.
be. Is it like Edgar Bronfman Jr.? Is it like Jeffrey Epstein? Like, who are we? Who is the epitome of like the elite's elite?
Mm.
Probably not as much of a compliment as as the sort of person who, well, nobody I know voted for Richard Nixon. Maybe then you don't have the best idea of what a true wealth is in this world. I don't know. Donald Trump still the greatest show on earth. P Diddy wishes he could rustle up this kind of press, good or bad. It is kind of like Trump's enemies praying for the head of Donald Trump on a silver platter, but not yet. They don't,
Right.
they don't want it yet. The dog that catches the car is going to be presented with a host of other problems that I wouldn't wish those problems on anyone. I mean, it's just going to be an existential crisis for vast swaths of people at all levels of society at this point. If in fact Donald Trump is whatever, what does it really even mean to get rid of him? He won't disappear if he's incarcerated. He will probably, I mean, if you look at what kind of stuff goes on in real banana republics, jailing your opponent is not sort of like an occasion for an end zone dance. It's in some ways you might be even more even more worried about their political power. So it's all kind of this weird charade, and meanwhile events continue to unfold, and Trump doesn't seem to be all that bothered. He just keeps spitting out these kind of instant classic meme moments when the reporter asked him how he was going to post his bond or whatever, and he goes cash, and you have to love it. It's all of television used to be like this, and now TV is almost dead.
Mhm.
And Trump is single-handedly sort of keeping the medium alive. It's a sight to behold.
I just wanted to say one other thing about this whole question of a poor person's idea of a rich person and so forth. I remember, I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but in 2017, right, the night before his inauguration, they had a anti-Trump rally outside his building on Columbus Circle, the old Gulf and Western headquarters, and like Michael Moore was there, and Robert De Niro, and they were all like Michael Moore. You can imagine was just stirring up the crowds with all of his class stuff, and they had I don't know, like some woman from the Minneapolis, some woman from, I think she became maybe either the mayor or somebody from Minneapolis who was like really strict. And then Robert De Niro goes, and he owns this sushi restaurant, Nobu. And he's talking about what an idiot Trump is. And he's like, if Trump came to Nobu, he'd probably say, why is the fish so raw?
No.
And why are the portions so small?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just seemed like I'm sure Trump has had sushi, I mean, I don't think that this is like, the win that you think it is. And it just sounded it was so snobby and stupid sounding.
It's
Um,
incredibly small. Yeah. Well, this has kind of been my read on Trump since 2016 was that what people called realignment, or at least a lot of what people called realignment, was really just class war. Like it was class resentment between this sort of, hyper educated, overeducated elite that speaks this abstruse language of social justice, and then kind of people that either don't have financial access to that elite or aren't interested in being a part of that elite, which struck me when suddenly like the clubbable nice lefties that I went to college with, increasingly weren't able to talk to me. It's like, oh right, because now we're in this class war, and that does seem to be part of what's going on, and it's something that Americans are uniquely kind of resistant to thinking about, maybe, or not. It's not a good look for us to be in this weird like aristocratic versus non-aristocratic set of resentments. But that is why the comparison to the meme stock thing is kind of striking to me, is that in that moment we all said, wait, are all stocks meme stocks? And is this just basically made up valuation? And is that true also of the debt and the money that they're printing and all that stuff? And this was the theme of that whole event, and this is kind of that on another big version. It's like, well, okay, I guess on some level the Truth Social may not be quote unquote worth that objectively, but also plenty of companies aren't worth, tech companies especially aren't worth objectively what they're valued at. It's about their potential, but it's also about what people believing in the mission. And there's a class difference there too. It's like you're allowed to quote unquote believe in the mission if it's Facebook or some ecological company that's like dealing with green reform. But if you believe in the mission of Trump, that's called fake confected value. That's called imaginary, whatever, dark money or lies. But I sort of suspect that some of this might go away, as people kind of lose interest. But also at that point, what will it matter? Like Trump has always operated with people's evaluations of him as well as with his actual liquidity. So no, it's all very funny to me.
I like what James said about what's a rich person's idea of what a rich person
Yeah.
should be. And I
Yeah.
think it's basically like Barack Obama,
Hmm.
like, jetting around wherever he wants, owning houses in Kalorama, Hawaii, and Martha's Vineyard, and just doing the right thing, not being too ostentatious, but clearly on his way into the to the realm of like nine figures or 10 figures or whatever.
The rich
Right.
person's idea of what a person should be.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're making lists of the best books and knowing all the right ones to talk about that are just sort of edgy enough that you haven't heard of them,
Mhm.
but certainly not edgy enough to actually like make you think or whatever. That sounds right.
Of course, we should be sure to point out expressly that that many rich people do not, in fact, share these prejudices
Right.
and are fine and upstanding members of this beleaguered society of ours, and perhaps some of them may even save what there is to be saved
And they should invest in the Claremont. That's the other part.
every day.
Should give us their money all the time. No, that's true. I mean, there's like the other part of class is like there's way more to it actually than money, and we sort of default to talking about how much money people have, but really what we're talking about is like our sort of people's aristocratic disdain, sensibilities, all that stuff. Okay, well, I guess we will continue to keep tabs on Trump. There's just no way around it, and it sure is whatever else it is. Nobody can deny that it is entertaining. Less amused am I, less entertained by this Biden plan that is being floated for granting amnesty to migrants who have been in the country for more than 10 years. They would have access to the cancellation of a removal or a program called the cancellation of removal program if they have relatives who would suffer if they were deported. So this is a Politico report that is getting picked up by, among other places, the Daily Caller. I really like the lead of this story. I think this is kind of a master class in understatement. President Joe Biden is currently considering granting amnesty to illegal migrants in a bid to act on the worsening immigration crisis. Biden and his administration are weighing several ideas to take a tougher stance on the southern border crisis and illegal immigration amid criticisms he has thus far failed to act on either. The administration could start doling out green cards to illegal immigrants who have long stayed inside the United States. So they're considering dealing with the problem by not dealing with the problem, essentially, by granting, just like basically making these people, giving them a pathway to citizenship. I mean, how serious do you guys think this is? How seriously do you take it? And is the national conversation about immigration such that this would be something Biden could get away with, or have we moved beyond the point where the Democrats can kind of shrug off the immigration issue uh, and the whole invasion of the southern border thing, and just like grant a bunch of people amnesty? What what's the
I
play
mean,
here?
didn't the Supreme Court already determine that you can't just, hand out green cards, like, to anybody?
Oh, the Supreme Court! What a quaint notion, Seth, that Biden would care. No, no. I mean, I don't know. Did they?
Yeah, with the deferred action for parents of,
Mm,
the DAPA case. I mean, I think that DACA, which was, like, kids who were brought here before they were 18, like, they managed to squeeze in, but I think their parents did not.
mm,
Um, politically speaking, it seems like it would be tough. I mean, from what I gather, immigration is like a major part of why he's not doing so great in the polls. So,
right.
I suppose he could try to force something through. I don't know what the how that would advantage him.
I mean,
Sort of
yeah.
seems like one of those situations where you get yourself into a mess and there you really have no prospect of like going back, insert Macbeth verse here.
Yeah, right.
Um, and so you march forward. Well, if this policy isn't working at 50% strength, maybe at 120% strength, it will start working. This administration has already demonstrated a not just a willingness but a thirst for um, taking executive action now and litigating it later, knowing that it will be litigated and doing it anyway. And there is a kind of perverse logic to the idea that the only way that you can really solve the illegal immigrant crisis is to just get out a giant eraser and erase their their unlawful status.
For
And then
like the 10th time on this podcast, I have occasion to reference the Edict of Caracalla, which made like everybody a citizen of Rome. That's basically what it is.
that's what this is all about. I mean, it's just classic like late empire problems. We've seen this movie before. We kind of know how it ends. And what better rhetorical cudgel to be swinging around than, not only then the rhetoric moves from they're not illegal, no person is illegal, to these are Americans, they're just as American as you are, and if you don't like it, then you must not like America. It's very, very powerful mind trick, and the temptation to just, uh, triple down on policy. I mean, this is kind of where politics has gone over the past 20 years or so. Never apologize, always double down, put the whole system on trial, don't bother defending yourself when you can just attack the other guy harder. And that would all be of a piece culturally with that. So, Supreme Court, how quaint. The court has made its decision. Let the court enforce its decision. These strains have always kind of been floating around, and probably inevitably in a divided powers regime, even a constitutional one. The chaos is increasing, and I think everyone in a position of power is going to be very tempted to just try to to ride the tiger and hope for the best. So buckle up.
Yeah, back when we started the podcast, we had a soundtrack or like a little sound effect that was just a goat screaming, because one of our first topics was the revelation of the lamb in the Ghent altarpiece and how crazy it looked. This sort of wide-eyed. These were the days. Seth, this was before your time, but when the show
golden
started,
days.
yeah, it was like Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself, and also the Lamb of Ghent knows what's coming, and he did. It was before COVID. This is a bit of a digression, but it was before COVID, and it initially had looked like this sort of serene, placid, gentle lamb, and then when they scraped away this other layer, you got this, crazy-eyed sort of Willem Dafoe meme picture, and we were talking about the spiritual significance of that, and so we eventually developed this routine where anytime something felt like the Lamb of Ghent, we would have a screaming goat sound. And now I feel that we need an Edict of Caracalla sound effect, like a honk or something, every time we'd start talking about this impulse that, as James rightly says, does seem to be the Biden administration's impulse to just full throttle it, like pedal to the metal, man. And it seems similar to me to the thing that just happened in the UN, where they allowed, basically without resisting, for the UN Security Council to pass a resolution calling for ceasefire. I mean, I've heard even that the administration was working behind the scenes to get to yes on this, as I suppose a gesture of appeasement toward the loudest but also craziest people in their party, which also seems to be the dynamic here. I think if I had to guess, I would say that Biden himself is even maybe a little bit more devoted personally to the open border part of this. He's kind of getting dragged along on Israel, but on letting people in, this is just sort of what he seems to want to do. And they can't, nobody can get him to moderate this position, which just seems insane to me because it is Trump's best plank. It's the thing that he's been right about. He's always been right about. He's gotten more right about it in the years since he first announced his candidacy. And Biden just cannot, will not, refuses to do anything other than what the most insane members of his party would seem to desire. I guess, I don't know, is the calculus that he just will sort of, when he defied the courts on student loan forgiveness and did the same thing where he was like, I know this is illegal basically, but they'll deal with that when the courts strike it down. Then I thought there was maybe some political benefit advantage to people would remember that. They wouldn't notice that it got struck down and he would gain the clout or whatever with young people. Is there something similar going on here that but whom is he trying? I guess he's worried maybe about losing young people to Trump. It seems insane to me to, accelerate on exactly the thing that Trump is most right about and the thing that is most obviously a problem for everybody across the board. And is like all this other like bread and butter stuff like inflation, or rather like wage depression and crime and all of these things that are just not really partisan issues, and that Trump has an easy answer to. It's just like bananas.
Well, it's funny. This week, I, I was looking over like old news reports about Biden, and in particular, I was looking at when his plagiarism, like in the '80s when he plagiarized Neil Kinnock's speech, and then pretended that like even till today, the way they talk about it is, oh, he meant to say Kinnock said, and that would have made it all good. Except his speech was saying, "I'm the first Biden to go to college," which wasn't even true. Like, because
Right.
his great grandfather went to college. I mean, it's really something to think of, like someone who's 80. If their great grandfather went to college, like
Yeah.
you can't really get away
Like,
with pretending
are there
that you're very
colleges? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
right.
right.
But here's the funniest part: is I found this quote that he made in 1965 when he was busted for cheating in law school on a paper. And in a letter to the dean, he wrote, "If I had intended to cheat, would I have been so stupid?"
Ah.
Now, that excuse to me, it means both I did cheat and I am stupid. And that I mean, this is when he was 24 years old or something. And that just summed up the entire Biden approach to the truth and to like dealing with people, which is just, I dare you to call me a liar.
Hmm.
Um, and that's how he's just bullied his way through. Regarding this, I think that flooding the country with immigrants is just such a top priority for the Democrats right now to
Yes.
to fill up their districts like and turn them into rotten boroughs. You
Huh.
know, load them up with as many non-voting people as possible. It doesn't even matter if eventually they'll vote, but for now, we just want them there to keep the numbers up. We can get more districts, steal Congress that way. Yvette Clarke, who's a Brooklyn congresswoman, she said this recently in some kind of interview or something about the migrant crisis in New York. She's like, "Look, from my perspective, this is helpful because I need it for redistricting." Like she
Jeez.
said the quiet part out loud.
Right.
This is what they want. So I think that's a lot of it. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, this seems like an easy one for Trump, but
Yeah. Right. I mean, if he stays disciplined, always a big if. But also, it's not even really it's not even that hard. He doesn't have to be all that disciplined. This is the thing that he is most remembered for,
Mhm.
and it's the thing that his hysterical critics are also constantly reminding people of. Like the the people that want us to hate Trump maximally. One of the first things they always default to is reminding us how tough he is on immigration. And so now that immigration is just, so blatantly in your face out there that even your nice suburban moms and your working class Democrats and whatever are all kind of like, this is bonkers. Even the stuff that they write about him, where it's like, he put kids in cages. It's like, nobody really wants to see kids in cages, but everybody is like, okay, but also Biden is, just flooding the zone.
Mhm.
Yeah, it does seem like a really foolhardy position, but it also right. I mean, James, I think the psychological dynamic you described is quite astute. Like that's definitely what other route, I guess, out of this is there at this point for Biden would be an interesting question. Do you guys think like what about this Israel thing? Is that also going to hurt him? It does seem like it might be too obscure or something, but it's pretty outrageous if you follow these matters.
I mean, according to the newspapers, he's really worried about Michigan. But I
Right.
think if so, it's dumb. I mean, it's kind of like every 4 years when, black voters say, "We're tired of being taken for granted. Maybe we
Right.
won't vote for the Democrats this year." And then they do by 93% or whatever. I don't think these, Arab Americans in Michigan are gonna well, they're certainly not gonna vote for Trump, and I don't really see them sitting it out. They'll come around as they always do, and, I would imagine that they would
Yeah.
still vote for him. I don't know. I don't think it's gonna help them with Jewish donors if
Well, it's not like RFK Jr. is really courting the Gaza vote so far as I can tell. Like, they're not going to default right to the third
no,
party.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
I think this goes back to Obama. Look, the only people that Obama and Biden, the only world leaders that Obama and Biden have both been caught on hot mic criticizing is Netanyahu.
Hmm.
The left has Netanyahu in their craw. They hate him. I think it's kind of like a screen for their dislike of Israel generally, but they like to pretend, oh well, we're just opposed to Netanyahu. You
Right.
know,
Yeah,
they can't stand him.
not sure how to parse the Israel issue in this election because the Jewish civil war is playing itself out, and uh, and it's becoming a more salient matter on the right as well as the left than in cycles past. And some of that is for, I think, r- relatively straightforward issues, and others are more manufactured and more bogus. It's true that Netanyahu has been a punching bag or a lightning rod for the left. On the one hand, it seems like things would calm down in Israel and in the U.S. sort of political maelstrom if a sort of someone at 85% Netanyahu levels replaced Netanyahu, but there doesn't seem to be such a person available. He is not as far out on a limb as some of the further right Israelis, but he's been in and out of power for a long time, and I think if there's a relatively more obvious weakness that Netanyahu faces, it has to do with being in and out of power for a long time. Like the past 20, 25 years, it's pretty much been the same, crop of super elites. They've sort of rotated in and out and created the world that we live in, and that world is pretty much a mess right now. And so that kind of prejudice against incumbents, I think, could be an issue for him. And the general sensation that, well, whoever it is who's been in charge of sort of the Western world, they all kind of blew it and they all kind of need to be replaced. Whether it's, the Tories in the UK, who I don't think have covered themselves in glory over the past several election cycles, to the quote unquote uniparty in the US. So I think that's going to be rough. Trump himself has been around for, at this point, a very long time. And I think that sort of cuts both ways for him too. On the one hand, you can say, well, this is stamina, and stamina is a certain kind of discipline, and he's only still around because he's determined to finish the job. There was that funny quote that still gets circulated where he went to see the truckers and he was like, "Oh, this is such a great truck. I sort of wish I could just climb into this truck and drive away. And it's been a great life, but it would be so nice to just kind of peace out." Um, there is a lot of pressure building for a massive change of the guard across the West, and who that burden is going to fall on the heaviest. That's what a lot of the fighting's about right now.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, Chuck Schumer, I think it was, made that speech where he just like called for an election, basically that the Israeli people need to like kick Netanyahu out. Which that version of this just seems like a total fantasy. I'm not all that up on Israeli politics, but I don't think that if the, Israel like called an election in the middle of this war, people would be like, let's get Bibi out. Now is the time to get Bibi out. And even if they were, it's not like they would replace him with somebody that was like a dove on Gaza. Like this is just a way for Chuck Schumer to kind of make noise. But then on the other side of it, as I gather, before this all broke loose, they were in the midst of like a really serious kind of constitutional battle that was kind of that's been kind of put on pause and put on hold. And meanwhile, in the US, we're sort of using Israel as this proxy for, I think, a really dark kind of uprising of like actual anti-Semitism. And so that just complicates matters too. I've like, there are, of course, as always, like legitimate ways to talk about Israel. And then there are just these sort of seething, like open Jew hatred that sort of seems to be part of this too, and now on the right and the left. And like, I gather that I sort of suspect that as always, we are using other countries as a proxy, like an imaginary proxy for our own internal disputes. That Israel is definitely going to have its problems to resolve after this war. And then we are kind of cosplaying about intervening in that as a way of actually having this, introspective argument within America. It's sort of my read on the situation.
Yeah, I mean the whole Israeli debate before October 7th was, like basically constitutional questions about the power of their Supreme Court. And it
Right.
ultimately related to, questions of how much authority the religious Jews should have. But it had nothing to do with security questions, with borders, with the
Mm-hmm.
Palestinians. So people would say, "Oh, well, I'm really opposed to the Netanyahu government." It's like, why? Like, what do you care about whether the ultra orthodox in Israel have to serve in the military or what taxes they pay? I mean, yeah, it's a proxy for like talking about the plight of the Palestinians and colonialism and refugees and all of that. But in reality, none of that stuff is at stake.
Right. It's like BB. It's this imaginary world in which like the Netanyahu government stands for war with Gaza, whereas in
Yeah,
fact, like Israel stands for war with Hamas because they're in an
right.
existential battle with Hamas. Like,
And
so
from what I gather, like the Israeli population is pretty unified
yeah, no, they're not.
on this question.
Yeah, yeah. Even like
I mean, it is a unity government. They did that immediately on October 7th. They formed they said, okay, for the duration, we're going to be a unity government. It's a coalition and we're at war. I mean,
right.
all of the labor people are, the other candidates, they're all generals. It's not
Right.
like they're like
No, they're
social workers or whatever.
right.
Well, how long is it going to last is one question.
Mm.
What are you going to do for an encore? I mean, there's only so much Gaza to go around, and it's inevitable that that events are going to continue to unfold. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah,
the
yeah.
only war in the neighborhood, and there are these latent and very severe divisions in Israel, and they're mirrored across America and on campus and elsewhere. And the longer this goes on, the more the seams begin to show. I mean, we've got Texas Governor Abbott putting out a statement about how anti-Semitism is unwelcome in Texas, and so I'm instructing basically a policy of putting an asterisk after people's free speech in order to ensure that anti-Semitism doesn't happen. Chris Rufo comes out and says, no, this is the wrong way to go about it. I mean, these fissures are going to deepen, and the longer that this goes on, the higher of a price politically, the right in America is going to have to pay. It seems like, in spite of the fact that the left is more kind of swamped with people who are genuinely pro Hamas, it hasn't really caused an earthquake. You have a sea of people in
Mm.
front of the State of the Union address saying, Hamas is better than Joe Biden or whatever those banners said. And he just kind of ranted through it, and life went on. That's not the way it works on the right, and I think there's some justifiable concern that as bad as Hamas is, simply redoubling the intensity with which people say Hamas is bad is not going to rescue the right in America from some of these extremely awkward challenges that are being presented.
I think that's true, but I think that you understate the extent to which the left is just going to go along with the pro Hamas stuff, like Jamal Bauman, that congressman who pulled the fire alarm. He's in. Oh, Joe Lieberman died. I see. My word. Um, Jamal Bowman. He's facing a very tough primary challenge in Westchester, largely based on his Israel stuff. I don't know. Yeah, look, I don't think this war obviously cannot go on forever. At some point, Israel's just going to have to declare victory and go home. The fact that there's these hostages complicates things, and I still don't understand why a Hamas surrender is just not on the table at all. Like nobody suggests that. I mean, the only option seems to me to be that Israel has to leave Gaza alone and just let Hamas, persist and do whatever.
Well, that ship has sailed at this point. But there is, I think, this kind of lingering question of what exactly does it mean for Hamas to surrender? Like, how do we know
Well, if they
what
gave
would
up the
happen
hostages,
that would? Is it really just surrendering? I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
it's would that it were so simple as just oh, they gave up and now the Gaza problem is solved. I'm not sure we're there yet.
You and me both.
Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting. I find it an interesting question to what extent the Democrats are going to just sort of, you know, plunk for we're we're sort of anti-Israel now, or at least pro-Palestinian or something. And then on the right, like our problem seems to have to do with the just elision between the justifiable position you shouldn't use curtailment of free speech as a way to deal with anti-Semitic sentiment. There's the elision between that and then just like full bore
Mm,
kind of endorsement of anti-Semitic sentiment, which of course is very useful for people that actually hate Jews because they can then muddy the waters about whether they're really saying, well, I just don't think you should make laws against people's free speech, uh, when in fact you'll like get them in your Twitter reply saying things like all Jews should die or whatever. And I mean, part of this I think has to do with the rights like reconsideration, irrespective of the Jewish thing about the nature of free speech and like to what extent are we these sort of free speech absolutists,
mm.
because then we're having this sort of separate argument about that when what you kind of want to be able to say is, yeah, you shouldn't make anti free speech laws, but you also shouldn't be a Nazi. Like that doesn't
Right.
seem like a hard a position to hold, but it is also that seems to be part of the right struggle at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's a huge mistake to try to limit free speech on this topic. I mean, I honestly like letting anti-Semites talk is typically like the best strategy to defeat them,
Good point. Right.
because they're so monotonous and such like one note Johnnies. I was saying to somebody the other day, it's like they're so boring because they keep finding the answer. They keep turning around and finding the same answer in the drawer where they just left it. That it's all the Jews' fault.
Right.
Like it's just it's so reductive and so stupid. So unless you're going to accept the narrative that Jews run the world, Jews control every aspect of everything, you know, it just gets a little tiresome. I mean, look, if you find that really compelling, um, why don't you give me a call? We can talk about how the moon landing never happened.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, this is
but
something we were talking about, Seth, is like I've been surprised recently with the real hardcore anti-Semites, like how moronic. Before you engage, you sort of think like, well, maybe there's something I'm missing here, and then you do engage, and you're like, oh, this is just like a zero information person that I'm talking to, and then that got us thinking about the extent to which that's kind of true across the board. Like you mentioned before, the suburban mom who's just heard about Gaza last week and now has deeply held opinions. There's this whole thing about like the Jews are everywhere, the moon landing never happened. I mean, all of this stuff relies on why did nobody ever tell me X? And X is just like well known, or X is
right.
just flatly false and demonstrably so. And that's kind of an amazing
Well, it's
look.
like people blaming the world for the fact that they didn't pay attention in history class in high school. Yeah, I mean, I saw this with like the attack in Russia last
Mhm.
week, where apparently like Chechen terrorists, I don't know who put them up to it, killed all those people in a Russian theater, and instantly I saw all these people on social media saying, "Well, this is obviously Israel did it because they're trying to distract me from paying attention to Israel."
Right,
It's
right,
like,
right. Yeah.
well, it's a very large world. There's a lot of things happening, and like, what's in front of your like the 3 inches in front of your face, isn't everybody's concern.
Hmm.
Like, there's other
Yeah.
things, like multiple things can be going on at once because the world is actually complicated. Like, whereas
Yeah, yeah. Welcome to the world. Like let's, take a look around.
right.
Yeah.
But there
Hmm.
is this notion like, no, 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 the world is not complicated. It's actually
Right.
very simple. And
Hmm.
that's what these, kind of broad narratives tend to foster. This idea that all I have to do is stick to this, that the elites run the world, the Jews run the world, whoever runs the world, and there's not actually that much more to know.
Hmm.
All I have to do is figure out who the bad guys are in this situation, and it all should be laid out.
Well, look, we live in two worlds. There's the good old fashioned real world, and then there's the virtual world. And
Mhm.
it's the existence of the virtual world has led people to realize that there are a couple use cases for the virtual world. One is to escape the good old fashioned real world. Oh, it's not big enough, and just ancient hatreds. People always killing each other, finite resources, and you see someone face to face, and you feel envious toward them, or maybe just you end up fighting them or whatever. But in the virtual world, you can have whatever identity you want. And you can just sort of leave all that stuff aside. And if you want to kill billions of people, you can play Civ 6 and it'll be fine. But there's another use case, which is, well, no, we're going into the virtual world so that we can rule it. And through ruling the virtual world, we will also rule the legacy real world.
Hmm.
Um, Recognizing those dynamics, I think leads more and more people are led to kind of analogize that, okay, well, there already was a virtual world and a sort of elite world, and what goes on in an elite world is something that we don't ever really get to know about, and all we can do is sort of speculate and look at this weird circumstantial evidence and kind of try to piece things together. And now the elites are going to take over the virtual world and use it to really take control of us in a way that we can't even measure or recognize or whatever. And that might all be happening. It certainly seems like there are factions of the quote unquote elite that would like to do that. It's got a logic to it. especially if you think that like, oops, we created this technology and it's thrown the world into kind of chaos and multipolarities here, and it's like really too hard to understand how to govern things and how to prevent catastrophes. So, it's not that we're evil, it's that if we don't rule the real world through the virtual world, then everything's just going to kind of fall apart and go crazy. So there are motivations for this reasoning that like, well, it seems very complicated, but actually it's very simple. That doesn't mean that your theory of the simple world is accurate. However, I think it's difficult to kind of think on two different levels where in one sense, yes, everything is quite simple, and in another sense, it is kind of hopelessly complicated.
Mm.
It's like, well, wait a minute, why is ISIS back? ISIS was gone, now it's back. These guys don't look like ISIS. They're doing some things that ISIS doesn't really do. Every major player right now in the world, geopolitically, has a very robust, um, more or less secret virtual government that is running ops in cyberspace all the time because that's just what you have to do if you want to defend your country in cyberspace. It is an invitation to mischief. It is also like very difficult to keep things simple. One group of people might blame Israel for the attacks in Moscow, but many people in Israel might say, no, 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 it's not Israel, it's Likud. Like those are the real bad guys.
Hmm.
And then Likud might say, like, well, it's not us, it's the Azeris, and we have to do business with the Azeris because of all this conflict. So just when you think you've kind of pinned the pin to the tail on the donkey, you look a level deeper and you see more chaos. Multipolarity is a real bit, and everyone's trying to penetrate everyone else's intelligence networks. Got all these random countries that used to mean nothing to anyone, and now they're like secretly important players in all these machinations that are going on. Ukraine has become kind of this, a well that Western interests can go into to muck around, and they want it to be weird and they want it to be confusing and they want it to be overly complicated. And so people are, really desperate for some kind of like sense making mechanism. And in the absence of anything that is somewhere in the middle between it's all total chaos, nothing really happens, nobody's in charge, it's a total jump ball, there's no predicting the future, we can't even understand the present, where it's
Hmm.
either that or it's actually everything is perfectly ordered. There's like a pinnacle elite group that controls everything. When your choices are one of those two things, it's not great for mental stability, and people need something to hang on to. It doesn't seem like they're going to get it anytime soon, unless they look past all of these kinds of machinations. And I think that's why, even though religious conflict has been a part of the West for a long time, religion still does offer many people a way of, you know, kind of quietly backing away from these inscrutable political mysteries and finding something with some more depth to it.
Oh,
Hmm.
absolutely. And I mean, I think basically what you have, you have two things going on. One is kind of like, I don't know, Stanley Cavell, I think, used to talk about this, like radical skepticism versus terminal skepticism. And like terminal skepticism to me is like I know that the world is full of lies, and so I assume that the ship that ran into that bridge was a coordinated attack, that Israel conducted the massacre in Russia. So basically, everybody's lying except me. Is the
Hmm.
sort of like terminal skeptical view of it, and then the radical skeptical view is like, yes, um, there's a certain essential ambiguity to what's going on, and the
Hmm.
best we can do is try to figure. Yes, everybody has motivations. There are oftentimes people have multiple motivations. Nation states operate the same way, so things are both simple in that everyone's trying to pursue their motives, and very complicated because their goals sometimes conflict, and there's a lot of subterfuge going on. Look, I'll agree that, like, sure, elites are pursuing their interests and they have a lot of power, no doubt. But
Hmm.
which elites, whose elites, you know.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if he still has it up, but one of my favorite pseudonymous Twitter accounts, Eigen Robot, used to have a pinned tweet with the clap emojis in between every word. And it was everything is monocausal and specifically related to whatever I'm on about right now, which is, I think, the phenomenon that we're like the negative phenomenon that we're observing. And you sort of pick your flavor. I saw somebody, one of the really grotesque memes that goes around is like, look at all these people who are in government who are Jewish. And it's like that you put the little symbol next to it or whatever. And so I saw somebody do it with like Irish people, which works equally well. And so there's this like desperation for some kind of filter that can sift through all of the noise. And if, you've never like heard of anything before, then the first one of those filters that you come across can be incredibly attractive.
Mhm.
And I think James is probably right that, this is in some way another form of like crying out for religion, which is supposed to serve that purpose, right? It's supposed to serve the purpose of the filter that like clarifies what is really important over and against the noise of what Christians are taught to call the world. I mean, this is one reason why Jesus is always on about, you're going to hear about the wars and you're going to hear about the rumors of wars and the earthquakes and the floods and the people who say that they're me and the people who say that I'm not me, and like all of this stuff is going to happen. And so keep your eye sort of on the prize, like that's kind of the good version maybe of what people want when they reach out for like the one weird trick that can make sense of all the other stuff, because otherwise like it just is the world. You're right, like Seth, it's sort of this endless amount of noise, and everybody is morally compromised and everybody's complicated, and there are in fact very powerful players, but they're themselves kind of conflicted amongst each other and in just as much of a shambles as we are on some fundamental level. And so then that's very terrifying, especially when, yeah, you're up against this real philosophical effort to like, we're really going to build that tower this time. We're really going to make
Mhm.
a name for ourselves and like put the one world government in place. Like there are people that kind of basically believe that. And that is a simple plan. And it's terrifying in its simplicity. So then you want to like be able to call it out. Now that I'm thinking about it, just off the top of my head, it occurs to me that this is sort of related to that thing we talked about earlier, where everybody wants the one smoking gun that is going to finally excise their preferred hate object from public life, whether it's the document that reveals Trump is in cahoots with Russia, or the Epstein list that's going to show that the elites really are a cabal of pedophiles, or the Burisma thing that's going to take Biden out. It's like, irrespective of the merits of these various accusations, the fantasy behind them is just another version of hoping that somebody's going to come and save you, and like the world's already been saved.
You know what? Let me just say really quickly, my favorite literary treatment of this topic is
Yeah.
Don DeLillo's Libra
Huh.
about Lee Harvey Oswald, and it's written from the perspective of a CIA guy who's been tasked with writing just for internal purposes, a history of the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
And the whole point of the novel is that it's so twisted and complex and either or, like Libra, the scales, that even Oswald didn't know what was going. Nobody knows very well. It's a great novel. It's really a
Nice.
fantastic novel.
Okay, that's a good. I will definitely check that out, and that's a good book rec to end the conversation on, because we were thinking about maybe talking about Huberman, Andrew Huberman, and the big intelligencer hit piece on him, but maybe we'll revisit it if it stays in the discourse. Probably not. It was so I read the entire damn thing so that you guys don't have to,
A
and
horny man's idea of a horny man.
Yeah.
Oh
Right.
man, it's male to male transsexual. Is that what I think that's what they call the maybe the Black Rifle Coffee guys? Yeah, I mean that's basically James summarized it perfectly, and there's not much more there than that. And we need to save some time to recommend pieces and remind you to read the damn site. So the website that we run is called AmericanMind.org, and we don't just mouth off about stuff on the podcast. We also invite other people to mouth off in a sophisticated, sustained, and precise way. online in these pieces that we will recommend to you. I would like to pick out a whole feature this time, if I can do that. I think I mentioned that I am sort of sailing into the sunlit uplands of being an editor at large rather than a features editor, but kind of my parting shot here is to orchestrate this series of responses to an essay by Charles Kessler in this, our sister publication, the Claremont Review of Books. The essay is called National Conservatism versus American Conservatism. You can read an excerpt of it at AmericanMind.org. You can also read the whole thing at ClaremontReviewofBooks.com. And not only is the essay itself, I think, a really clarifying and sophisticated and charitable treatment of a movement that Charles has criticisms of, which is national conservatism, sort of spearheaded in large part by Yoram Hazony, and with the statement of principles signed by many people, some of them friends and fellow travelers and so forth. Kessler very ably articulates his reasons for worrying that, in fact, nationalism is not actually what America is about as a nation and as an exceptional nation with a particular story about itself and its purpose in the world. So there's lots well worth reading in there. And then we've got 2 responses up so far. There'll be more to come. One is by David Goldman, Two Atoms, Two Foundings. The other is by Daniel Mahoney, On Nations and Nationhood. Helpfully, and I think pleasingly, we've got people, as it were, on both quote unquote sides of this issue, and that David is a signatory on the National Conservatism Statement of Principles and speaks, very charitably from that perspective. Others less so, and sort of more on Charles's side of things. If there are sides, there will be further conversation about this also in CRB. So I just invite you to kind of dive in, because there's like a lot in there that is really worth reading, and it's political philosophy of a non-abstruse kind, which is my favorite kind. Oh, and the feature is called America's Nationalism. You can find in the feature section. Seth, what do you got?
Well, I like this piece that we published by our friend Raw Egg Nationalist called Gynocracy Takes an L. And Ren, as we call him around here, Raw Egg Nationalist, he looks at this, this contention that I'd heard vaguely about in, anthropology, that women, historically, Paleolithic women, were as much the hunters as men were. And in fact, in some cases, they were that they took the lead in going out and hunting down big game. And Raw Egg Nationalist just goes through the studies and all of the articles about this, and just completely shows how it's all bogus. It's like nonsense. It's all serving like a contemporary political agenda. And he's got a very light style, so it doesn't get like too bogged in, even though it's a very long piece. But it's a fun one. So I recommend that everybody go and check out Gynocracy Takes an L by Raw Egg Nationalist.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, the purpose of those anthropological claims is almost exclusively to provide fodder for plainly absurd revisionist histories that prevent, like movies and TV shows that prevent incredibly implausible scenarios, like these big hulking Viking women leading their tribes or whatever. And so it's helpful. I mean, you can tell when they start talking about this stuff, it's like, definitely sounds fake, but really cool to have somebody explain that in fact it is. James, what do you got?
We have a piece from Soviet-born emigre Katya Sedgwick by the name of Tsar Vladimir, taking, I know this is shocking, a mature and adult view of the recent elections in Russia. Putin's election was flawed, but there's no doubt of his popularity, is the subhead. I am tempted in retrospect to have titled this piece, I'm Here, I'm Tsar, Get Used to It. But it is interesting because, in fact, Putin is many things, but an actual czar is not one of them. And among the many interesting things to think about when it comes to Russia, hopefully I will find the brain cells to write about some of them coming up. is that in fact no, there is no going back to what was before communism destroyed the Russia that was. There's no going back to the USSR. All of those analogies, I think, are pretty invalid. And if there is going to be a restoration of the Russia that was, it would require an actual czar. And somehow it just seems very far fetched to me that Putin himself would, I don't know, have himself proclaimed the czar of Russia. I don't think he's going to do it, no matter how many Russians are actually starting to pine away for that sort of arrangement. So, an unusual man, to be sure, and one who seems to have the stamina to match. So, Tsar Vladimir, give it a read.
Yep, always helpful to have people like who know what they're talking about talk about Russia, because it's always seems like a rarity. That does it for our show this week. We're very grateful to all of you for listening. If you want to learn more about the projects that we manage here at the Claremont Institute, we've already mentioned two websites where you can do that, AmericanMind.org and ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com. In addition, you can check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. And you can donate to support not just this show, but everything we do in support and defense of the American idea at claremont.org/donate. We will repay you in the gratitude of our hearts, which will be very sincere. And we'll even shout you out on the show if you want to be. You just have to mention in the notes that you are interested in that. The other thing you can do to support us is you can share this show or rate it 5 stars wherever you're listening. Subscribe, drop it in the group chat, Slack it to your boss, text it to your mom, like whatever you do to let people know about good content. Please do spread the word, because that helps obviously grow our audience. And that's part of our master plan to take over the world. And why wouldn't you want that? We're such great guys. All right. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Sapieri. And thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.